what had our numbers so high for so long was we held on to like teal and pintail and stuff much longer than we normally do. So, I mean, we certainly had some leave, when they typically do, but we held on to a lot of those smaller bodied waterfowl through a lot of the fall that we normally don't.
Yeah, and it's funny, Josh. Folks try to always call those calendar ducks at the southern regions, and I'm like,
Halloween ducks.
They're not. Like, what's going on is most of the time, by the time seasons open in like Mississippi and Arkansas and Louisiana, those ducks are there, right? Because usually there's been weather, but this year was a total anomaly where those ducks were still hanging north.
You are tuned in to the Foul Weather Podcast, the forecast to your next successful hunt. Coming to you from the home office, Jack's Reef, New York.
So we're real excited today at the Foul Weather Podcast about our guest, Josh Osborn, observer for the Forbes Biological Station aerial waterfowl surveys. Today, we fly with Josh. Welcome, Josh, to the Foul Weather Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mike. It's good to be here.
Yeah, and so I really like this because we've got, we're going to hear it from the horse's mouth as to what it looks like being in a plane and what the duck numbers were last year and, all the other cool jobs that you get to do along the Illinois River with Forbes Biological Station. So hang on, folks. We're going to, as I said, we're going to fly with Josh. But I want to tell you, though, so I did some observer time myself, right? And in all my adventures, like as a kid growing up in the Allegheny Plateau of Western New York, I was one of those kids that chased squirrels. My dad ran coon dogs, and I was swimming in trout streams. I never thought I'd actually find myself over the Atlantic Ocean in a twin otter, part Navia as an observer with the Fish and Wildlife Service, a Fish and Wildlife Service pilot at the helm, or flying by the CN Tower of Toronto, counting ducks on Lake Ontario. And I kind of somewhat think, Josh, that you might be the same. I'm guessing you didn't grow up with the aim to be flying on the deck counting ducks over the great rivers of our country. So maybe a little background about you as a waterfowl enthusiast and how you came to be that guy counting ducks for Forbes on the Illinois and Mississippi rivers.
Sure. Yeah. So very similar background, except for, a lot further south. So I grew up in North Mississippi, and I quite honestly wasn't even a waterfowl hunter growing up. The region of the state that I'm from, it's not an abundant species anymore, unfortunately. So I'm from Northeast Mississippi, kind of right on the Tennessee and Alabama line. Mm-hmm. I grew up hunting small game and deer and things like that. And it actually wasn't until I came home from the Navy on leave one time that I actually went duck hunting. And it only took one time. A couple of friends that I grew up with, it's like, hey, we're gonna go duck hunting when you come home again. And I was like, that'd be great. So that's kind of my introduction into it. I was probably, 20, 21 at the time before I ever went duck hunting for the first time, and I haven't stopped since, for better or worse, I guess. But that kind of started this whole, of course, I was a wildlife enthusiast before that, but it kind of started this whole ball rolling. I was in the Navy for 6 years, and I enjoyed the people that I worked with, and in some ways enjoyed the work, but it's not something that I wanted to do forever. And so when I moved home, my girlfriend and I, she's my wife now, we talked about what I was going to do when I got out, and I was just, hey, why don't I love being outdoors. I haven't gotten to do it in 6 years. Let's explore this wildlife thing. That's kind of how I worked for it. Ended up working for kind of shadowing district biologist, Jerry Hazelwood. And he let me come tag along on some of the more cool things that he got to do, whitetail deer, herd health checks, beaver dam, removal. Those are always fun. And what struck me is that anytime, it didn't matter if it was 3 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Jerry would always laugh on the way back to the station and say, can you believe they pay me to do this?
Right.
And I wanted to do that. It wasn't, that was really my first chance at getting to see research. And so I kind of fell in love with it after that. And I guess the rest is history. Went to Mississippi State undergrad and lucky enough to follow that up with a master's degree at Tennessee studying black duck and other waterfowl habitat use and food use. And then ultimately got hired on here in 2013 at the Forbes station. And I've worked on a ton of different projects since. So it's not a non-traditional kind of route, but I feel like the more people you talk to in this field, that tends to be the rule rather than the exception, is a lot of non-traditional folks going different routes to get where they are.
Yeah, for sure. Just it kind of develops organically and you might find it later. And,
Yeah.
it seems that a lot of people just, I mean, when it comes to ducks, they gravitate towards them at some point, right? I still love my deer hunting. I still love my turkey hunting and I'm crazy about wetlands and birds in general, but there's something that constantly brings me back to ducks. I was chatting with kids on campus the other day and I was like, do you ever run into anybody that doesn't like ducks? Like ducks are just lovable. Like it's like a universal language, even for non-wildlifey type people, right? And the two of us, again, a lot alike, right? Not growing up chasing ducks. I grew up in hill country and not really a super ducky place, trout streams, squirrels, deer, stuff like that. But once I got to a place that was filled with swamps, I just quickly really gravitated to it. So, it's just cool how we all end up in this field from different angles for sure. So,
Yep.
But let's get into it. When you started flying surveys, recall those early days. Was it just easy? Did it come naturally to you? I mean, my thing that I always ate was Pop-Tarts to settle my stomach. They're just like sat heavy or something. But get into like those first few days of flying with the ducks and what it was like.
Yeah. So Aaron had me come up, Aaron and Mike, just for a couple of surveys with them just to see what it was like. I don't know if that was long before Aaron retired, so I don't know if he was kind of feeling me out to see if I was a potential replacement or not, or he just wanted me to tag along because it's such a unique experience. Probably the latter, but so I flew a couple of times with him. The first, I would say probably 2014, 2015. But then we started a project here. So Dr. Hitegi was the station director at that time, and we kind of wanted to observe or wanted to evaluate how good the survey was, or and even if there was a better method to do it, if we could use some modeling and some different methods. So our survey is a cruise style survey. So we fly these refuges in the fall, and we're trying to count every little acre of the refuge, right? And so there are other methods that other states and other places use, grid surveys and transect surveys. And so we kind of evaluated that. And that's how I found myself in the plane, is we needed an observer in the back to look at the things that Aaron didn't have time to get to on these grid surveys and on these transect surveys. So my first couple of years in the plane was actually sitting in the back seat looking at percent water coverage, percent ice coverage, and Aaron kind of testing me on different flocks and saying, well, how many did you have there and how many did you have here, to try to see if I was seeing the same thing he was. And so then that rolled into ultimately Aaron getting closer to the end of his career in 2020, and I flew with him a few times then. And I think the fall of 2020 was his last fall survey season. And I flew with him that entire season, and then ultimately took over in fall 2021. But Aaron was an eater, so Aaron had to have a bag full of candy, and he joked, and it kind of, there was a lot of truth to it, but Aaron would gain weight during the survey season. And
really, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, but he had to eat constantly, especially on really turbulent days. I'm almost the exact opposite. I can't eat in the morning. I'll have like a snack bar, and if I make through when I make it through the morning, I don't really struggle with it anymore. But I can eat lunch. That's fine. I can eat at lunch stop in Quincy, Illinois. But I'm not an eater. I have to have something to drink with me because sometimes it gets warm in the plane. But yeah, I think it's different for every person.
Yeah.
It's
It was
such
always
a
the heat.
such
If there was heat, it would get
yeah,
me. But mostly
yeah,
what I was doing was midwinter survey stuff, lots of times,
yeah,
or late fall stuff over, Lake Ontario. So it wasn't
yeah.
as
So
bad. You could keep the plane a little cool, right? Josh, you mentioned Aaron a few times, and Aaron Yetter, to me, was kind of, I don't know, legendary around Forbes for all the years that he'd flown and all the projects that he'd been involved with there. But, could you go through a little bit of the history of the aerial waterfowl survey and how long it is? It
yeah,
is really an impressive data set, just to give our listeners some history. And then, obviously give props to Aaron, too, for all his great work, which you've already started to do.
absolutely. So I mean, you're well aware that in our field, we like to say that we stand on the shoulders of giants. And in my mind, you could use this survey as like a direct poster child for that, right? Because
Yeah, for sure.
last year was the 75th year, continuous year of fall surveys for us, and we do some stuff in the spring and some shorebird surveys as well. But for the fall survey, it was the 75th consecutive year of it. Frank Belrose, who's just kind of the waterfowl beginner for us in Central Illinois, at least, and very important to our field in general. He started these surveys, and the way he started up was in 1938. He just started driving around, kind of
Hmm.
counting the birds that showed up in the Illinois River Valley. And as time went on, he obviously knew that he could cover more ground and much quicker if he got into the air. So in 1948, he started flying these surveys, and he was able to cover most of the state, and actually parts of the state that we don't cover anymore, DNR covers, and as
Okay.
well as the Mississippi River as it occurs in Illinois. And so Frank kind of spearheaded this whole thing. He stopped flying in 1970, and that's when Tud Crompton took over. Tud Crompton took over in 1971 and flew
Hmm.
till 89. And then Michelle Horace, who was actually on staff here when I started in 13,
Yeah.
she flew from 90 until 2004, and that's when Aaron picked up in 2005. And so Aaron Yetter flew until spring of 2021. And, Aaron kind of spent the last few years of his career working on ways to look at the disturbance that we were causing.
Hmm.
And when we did that with a couple of grad students here, he worked with Dr. Hagee on evaluating if there were other methods that we could do to make it better, and it turns out they're not.
Right, right.
But at least for our landscape. And so I feel super fortunate to be a part of this,
Yeah, yeah.
and try not to screw it up, right? So five observers over the 75-year history, a survey that actually predates the midwinter inventory for U.S. Fish and
Hmm.
Wildlife Service. It's kind of a unique data set, and we can talk about later about how we use this data set and
Yeah.
everything. I'm sure that's a question to ask.
Yeah, I mean, we've used it for development of our weather severity indices, right? With prior grad
Mhm.
students, and we've got a PhD student now that's trying to improve on some of that, and so that we'll have diving duck, equations too, so we can predict diving duck movement as well. And I know a lot of folks have used those data over the years. That these long-term data sets are just super super important. And, we've heard word that, like, the migratory bird office is being defunded, and maybe the breeding waterfowl survey might be in jeopardy, and that just scares the heck out of me because
Yeah,
these types of surveys are some of the largest and best surveys that we have in the world, right? And to lose that history and lose that legacy by missing years or maybe ending them, to me, is kind of a hard pill to swallow. I mean, there's from flying, there's problems with them, but they're not insurmountable. They still give us some trend over time, and we'll get into talking about last year's winter, right, and how mild it was, and you can detect that in your data for sure. It's good enough
right.
for that, right? But
Yeah, and once you miss them, you can't go back and get them again, right?
yeah,
So like,
exactly. Yeah. So what does what's a day of surveying entail? I mean, I remember flying the midwinter survey, and my wife's father was an air traffic controller, and he had flown a little bit some himself, but he ended up being an air traffic controller. But she kind of knew the whole deal of how like it just is hard on your muscles. It's just energetically taxing to be in a small plane all day.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole like prep breakfast right and eat the right food at night, especially if you're flying like multiple days. It just seems to, wear you down. But to get like kind of from start to end, a day of surveying and let the listeners know, what does that entail for you?
Sure. It's Aaron liked to say, and I couldn't agree more. It's a different kind of tired that you feel
Mm-hmm.
after a full day of survey. So I try to be at the airport here in Pekin before sunrise. We're usually taking off, around sunrise or a little after, depending on the weather for the day. That's another thing is we're, especially in the winter, we're so dependent on getting the right weather to fly.
Mm-hmm.
And like I mentioned earlier, I'm not an eater. So I'll usually have a small snack in the morning. But we'll take off from that Pekin Airport there, and which is kind of, sort of, about halfway through the Illinois River for us. And so we'll head south, counting, and we count strictly refuges during the fall survey. But we take off from the Pekin Airport there and fly all the way down to the confluence of the Illinois and Mississippi rivers, which is kind of a historic area in its own right. So St. Charles County, Missouri, down there.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where we pick up the Mississippi River. And so we start along the river and the refuges along the river, heading north. And we stop in Pekin, Illinois, so we can only go about 4.5 hours before we run out of fuel.
Mm-hmm.
And so we stop in Quincy and pick up some fuel for us and fuel for the plane. And then we usually it's about a 45-minute or hour break. I think Mike just tries to stretch it sometimes when he knows that I'm really struggling,
Mm-hmm.
especially during peak migration. So I can catch a little break there and then hop right back on the Mississippi River and all the way north, up to the Quad Cities. And I think the northernmost refuge that we fly in the fall survey is Port Louisa refuge.
Yep.
And then we deadhead straight over to Bureau County, Goose Lake, and Hennepin Hopper Lake, and that area of the northern Illinois, and then fly south and counting the refuges until we hit Pekin again. So it's all told during peak migration, it can be 8-9 hours of survey.
Yeah.
But really probably more so in the line of 8 hours during the fall. The spring survey can get a little hectic because we still count all the hunted areas and every little pothole during the spring. But
Mm-hmm.
for the fall survey, it's usually right around 8 hours, which kind of puts us cutting it close for sunset,
And that might
like you
take,
said, you're just exhausted at the end of the day.
your eyes are burning. I mean,
Yeah.
what, like, at a peak migration, just ballpark, how many ducks you're counting in a day that you got to put your eyeballs on, do you think?
Oh, it varies. So, 750,000 across both rivers. Sometimes, I guess it just depends on the year. But
Yeah.
we
Like,
peak, we peak in the 450, 500,000 across one river,
Mhm.
depending on the time. And each river, it's kind of cool to see, but each river peaks at a different time, right? So along the
Mhm.
Illinois River, we usually peak just a little bit earlier than the Mississippi River does. Yeah.
And yeah, so you probably accustomed to those different types of places ducks are at different times, but that's what, every 2 weeks you guys fly about, and or not? What is
No,
it?
we fly every week.
You fly every week, and you think you
Yep.
need to fly every week because you might miss that peak if you fly every 2 weeks at times. Like, do they blow through on you if you don't count every
Sometimes.
week?
So it's not so much the peak, or I guess in ways it is the peak, but it's much more the peak of a certain species.
Yeah,
So
for
it's
sure.
especially birds like canvasbacks. When the habitat quality on pool 19 of the Miss is not that great, the canvasbacks will blow through here in sometimes just a few days. In fact, one of the last years that Aaron flew, he completely missed the canvasback peak on the Mississippi River. They were
Really?
he could kind of see the buildup, and then the very next week it was just gone. He just completely missed the peak altogether.
That's
So
interesting. And
that definitely happens.
yeah, so when you say like conditions aren't good, is that like what is on the river? Is it wild celery? Is it Is it the food? Is it the height? Is it the turbulence? Like, what's the effect there on the cans?
So I think it's mostly submersed aquatic. So I don't think they have a lot of wild celery over there on Pool 19
Okay.
or any really anymore, because that portion of the river is so impacted these days.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's just a lot of submersed aquatics in there. There's in the drier summers like we've had lately, you can really see the lotus beds pick up, and I think there's
Okay.
a lot of submersed aquatics that come with that.
Okay.
Pond weeds, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure milfoil and
Mm-hmm.
even coontail in places.
Yeah, we're starting. I don't know. I had students a few years ago, and I've mentioned this on the podcast too. They couldn't remember. One student couldn't remember submerged aquatic vegetation, so they called it wet lettuce, and I kind of I really like that one. But
Yeah,
that's I don't care how they remember it really. I mean, we can call
yeah,
it whatever we want as long as they know why it grows and where it grows, and then they can identify the species of wet lettuce. I'm good with that. So.
sure. Yeah,
But that's a lot of flying over and over again, and so you
yeah.
must get accustomed to where ducks are at different times. But other than the weather, which is an obvious driver of duck migration, is there anything else you've noted beyond that SAV for cans that are like drivers of duck abundance across your survey area from kind of year to year, or maybe even within year, as you noted?
So we start the survey in late August, early September. So we try to catch the early teal migration,
Mm-hmm.
and then we break for a couple of weeks in the around the 1st of October, and then we fly all the way through to the midwinter survey the first week of January. And so that first little stretch, it's really neat to see the birds redistribute themselves when hunting season's open.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's pretty drastic after, we're separated into zones here in Illinois. So when the north zone opens, you can see just an immediate change on the refuge count, and it's the same throughout the state when all the other zones open. So that's part of it. It's really cool to see that.
Mm-hmm.
And just like everybody else across all the flyways, we kind of watch the weather. Weather, kind of drives the duck abundance for us.
Yeah.
We're kind of watching what's going on in the prairies and what kind of weather they're getting, what kind of ice cover and snow cover that they're getting, and just kind of hoping to see that next push of birds here. We're a very not so much on the Miss, but on the Illinois River, we're a very, very flashy river system.
Mm-hmm.
So Chicago, the greater Chicago area, can get 3 inches of rain, and that bumps us up a couple of feet here. And so it's that plays a role in how birds kind of distribute themselves on the landscape here a lot,
Mm-hmm.
because there's not a ton of places that are protected by levees.
So it floods
Here.
out pretty
Yeah. So
strong, and
we
the
get
birds react
pretty,
to that and
yeah, we get
redistribute pretty quickly. Yeah.
pretty significant floods here.
Okay.
Not so much in the last few years, but prior to that, I would say it's pretty daunting to try to figure out where the birds are at times.
Yeah, and so do you have to change your flight pattern then a little bit to pick up on them, or fly places you
No,
wouldn't fly, or how does that work?
no. So we try to keep everything consistent. That's part of the great thing about the survey is we've been flying the same refuges. It's just that you may see birds in certain parts of the refuges that you just haven't seen them before, or you're not
Yeah.
used to seeing them. So it's kind of I find myself in flood years, you can find yourself saying, where are my ringnecks or where are my pintails?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that just means we have to spend a little bit extra time to make sure that we're not missing birds.
Yeah, but you said last few years were dry, so everything was pretty restricted in general. That the dry is something a lot of people contended with in the mid continent. But you also,
Yeah.
before we jumped on here, were mentioning, and I remember this. It's in like folks in Iowa were worried about birds, blowing right by them because the Dakotas got that like really good cold shot, kind of mid October, I think, and a lot of
Mhm.
birds moved in on you. But then that mild weather that really affected everybody, I think, across most of the central Mississippi and Atlantic flyway. Sounds like y'all kind of had birds caught up in that too. So just a little rundown of what last year looked like and maybe compare it to prior years you've flown. The Farmland Group has handled over $400 million in farm sales across the Mid-South and recently added some spectacular wildlife management expertise, particularly for waterfowl and waterfowl hunting, to their diverse portfolio. Maybe you want to get started with a new duck hunting property, or maybe you want to enhance an existing property to peak performance. Look no further than the Farmland Group. With licensed agents and affiliated relationships, the Farmland Group is ready to assist clients across the states of Arkansas, Mississippi, Missouri, Louisiana, Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia. You've been thinking about it for years. No need to put it off anymore. Build your duck club dream with the Farmland Group. Their expertise doesn't stop at sales. They also have extensive lending relationships with the biggest farmland and recreational lenders in the country, as well as a staff appraiser that can assist in helping value your property. Find the Farmland Group today at farmlg.com. That's farmlg.com.
Yeah, it was a. I hesitate to say this, but I find myself saying it was a weird year every year. So sooner or later, you can't say it's a weird year. But so it started somewhat similar to what most years start for us. But then, like you said, that cold blast on the prairies, we kind of got this early influx of birds all at once, really. But we just stayed so mild. Even locally, we didn't have local weather to kind of make birds get up and move around. And we just hung on to birds, especially the smaller bodied birds, a little bit longer than we normally do. So each year we create this graph of like when the peak is and waterfowl abundance overall, and then species abundance for each species. And so it's kind of this nice bell curve that pops up and then gradually declines over time. Well, that gradual decline over time just took a little bit longer this time. So that bell curve was a little bit more plateaued, especially for the smaller bodied waterfowl, like the green-winged teal and the pintail and stuff like that. A gadwall, even. We hung on to gadwall for a long time.
Yeah, it actually seemed like you guys your season closed. You stopped flying and you still had ducks. Which is unheard of, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, and we've had some discussions lately about whether or not we need to continue flying into January a little bit more. We're gonna that has implications for the survey and for the 10-year averages and the 5-year averages. Is something we're gonna have to figure out. So that's kind of a discussion that we're having and that's a discussion that's happened before. So the way we analyze the data now is we cover the beginning of the survey all the way up to the close to the end of December, middle of the end of December. And the reason we do that is because that's when Frank flew. That was the historic flight. It wasn't until more recent decades that we started flying all the way up until the midwinter inventory in January. So it's kind of, I don't know. It's just a modern problem that we're going to have to figure out whether or not we should fly further, because we are, in certain ways, especially for mallards, we are kind of becoming a wintering state in Illinois.
I mean, we are in New York, and it's insane just to see the numbers of these birds now that are staying, past our season closes, and they're still here, where typically our marshes would freeze up and we'd be on the Finger Lakes and shooting diving ducks, and there's some mallards that would hang there, but now they just go to big bodies of water and rivers, and they wait for it to thaw and they just go back, and it was wild. I mean, the refuge by us they could have counted every single week for the whole entire winter and had birds all along. And, well into, we're still holding on to a few kind of late migrants now, but it's kind of crazy. It's not like it's happening every year. It just seems like the frequency of those types of events, those mild winters, are increasing. So,
yeah. And so we've there's some consternation about whether or not we should change hunting seasons. And we've put together some graphics and talked about, the way DNR manages that, and that's who funds how. It's important to note. I don't think I have this whole conversation, but it's important to note that, Illinois DNR is who supports this.
Okay.
But so, right now, you want to provide the most hunting opportunities for each zone when the birds are there. And,
Mhm.
judging from the graphs that we have, or even from the most recent years, we're still doing that. So
Yeah.
there's, you know, they may be staying longer, but they're kind of still getting here at the same time in a lot of areas, or in most areas. And certainly in peak abundances, we're still seeing this kind of the same trends over
Yeah,
time.
and Hagee and I talked about that when I had him on because he's been involved with that research on, changes in distributions of ducks using band recoveries and things, and
Hmm.
noted that some of the early months actually the timing moved up a little bit, and that's what
Right.
it seems like is that under this, and there's a very specific reason for this, but as the ocean gets warmer, it seems like we more frequently get these really cold shots in October in the mid continent, and there's not very often like birds lingering way into November, like before there's a cold shot. But then after that happens, they just kind of get to mid latitudes and ball up and kind of stay there. And that's where you're still going to get your ducks during your season for Illinois.
Hmm.
You're just not losing them after that. They just kind of hang
Right.
on longer. So
Yeah.
yeah, it makes
And
your
you
season still like placed in a relatively good spot.
exactly. And you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe most of that research is showing that um, it's not, we're talking about a couple 100 kilometers that these core areas are
Mm-hmm.
shifting, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the migration terminus of these birds. So it's shifting, but it's not shifting by a lot. It's not like the Midwest is holding all the birds, right? And
Right. Right.
the
For
South is
sure.
just not getting them anymore. So it's
Yeah.
it's making those core kind of wintering areas larger, but it's
Yep.
just by a couple 100 kilometers, if I'm not getting that wrong.
No, you're right. And so like the one thing we should never ignore is that like Arkansas still shoots a ton of ducks. I mean,
Right.
it's
Right.
less, it's less, but it's
Yeah.
still more than most all of us ever see in
Yeah,
a
being from the
harvest,
South, I still, I still try to keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on down there, and try to get down there and hunt and
Hmm.
enjoy the resource when I can. And all of my friends got awful quiet down there around early to mid January when we completely locked up and all the
Yep.
birds left here.
Yep.
And I find that when my friends get quiet down there, that means they're shooting birds. So
Yeah, it is fun. I love watching social media, and there's all kinds of John going on and debates. The thing you should definitely do on social media is debate with other duck hunters. It's
right.
super productive.
Yeah.
but but yeah, then it just gets quiet, and then early February all the pictures pop up of piles of birds, right?
Yeah.
So it's if you've been watching this stuff for a while, when it's happening. So
Hmm.
a little bit on the data set, right? And you've touched on kind of research and stuff that you've done with it for monitoring waterfowl and otherwise, but is there other research that you guys have been involved in, how that data set's used? I mean, obviously we're digging into it to understand drivers of duck migration and
Hmm.
things, but like what else has been out there that other folks have come to you for that you guys have used these data for?
Yeah. So, first and foremost, DNR uses the data to monitor, the peaks and valleys and the trends in the population as they occur in Illinois over time, right? And so that's
Hmm.
that's kind of what, the driving force behind this was when it all got started. And of course, like you mentioned, the drivers of migration using weather and other factors. And I think I even mentioned earlier, we used the survey for a number of years there to evaluate our methods, to evaluate
Right.
whether or not this was a reasonable thing to use as an indicator of duck migration. And we evaluated Aaron's accuracy, and it turns out he was something in the neighborhood of 93, 94% accurate,
Hmm.
counting birds on the refuges. We had a graduate student who's actually on staff here now, Andrew Gilbert, who looked at disturbance and how that varies, disturbance from the surveys, and
Hmm.
how that varies across species. And so, as it turns out, we do somewhat disturb birds, but it's not significant. And outside of snow geese and white-fronted geese, which we usually don't even, especially in the spring, they're usually out in the field feeding. But in the fall, they'll pick up for sure, but they almost always, I think, to the tune of like, again, 93% or something like that, 92, 93%, almost always go right back down where they were.
Hmm.
And so Andy did some really cool work. He published a couple of papers looking at how birds respond to disturbance of the airplane. And since we're on disturbance, that's kind of a hot topic of hunting disturbance in the southeast. And we've got our own disturbance project here looking at how that might differ at mid latitude. So how pressure on the landscape might impact bird distribution, but also maybe it impacts migratory decisions, and whether or not, whether or not these birds are making a decision quicker to go down to their wintering grounds because of the disturbance that we're causing. And so we're trying to use some of the survey data for that. And kind of more, I won't say anecdotally, but more kind of on the ground management, which is the stuff that I really enjoy, is relaying research to, refuge level or, region level. We use this data, constantly getting requests from refuges and state managers looking at how restorations or land changes or habitat changes have affected bird distribution and how birds respond in certain areas. And that's something that I really enjoy because I like to see how kind of direct management implications of this data set. So and I could go on and on about it. I won't, because I could take an hour just talking about that.
Just the research stuff and the disturbance and the food and all that, how it intertwines. Well, let's do that for a second, Josh. Like anecdotally, we hear a lot about, disturbance matters more than food. And then you've got the weather intertwined with that, as well as like, can the birds get away from the disturbance? Like, what do you see, and this is just anecdotal from the plane. What are your thoughts on, what causes these birds to kind of redistribute the most? And to what extent does food play a role in, holding them around?
Well, yeah,
sorry, that's a whole ball of wax, but answer it however.
Yeah, I mean, if I could answer that question, I would solve a lot of our problems.
Yeah, I think so.
I think it's a little bit of both, right? So, absolutely, food is a driver for these birds, but disturbance plays a role in that. And like I mentioned before, when you see hunting seasons open and the birds just immediately go to refuges, then that plays a role. I think you could look at some of the research coming out of West Tennessee right now, and even Arkansas, and Doug Osborn's group in Arkansas, looking at how birds are kind of distributing themselves on the landscape, and you see that the birds just kind of shift to a more nocturnal pattern. They're perfectly content to go sit on a refuge that may or may not have food, and then just go make feeding flights at night. And so kind of teasing out the differences between, how both refuge and food availability plays a role in what birds do is something that is not super well understood, and it's something that a lot of people that are much smarter than me are working on it now.
Yeah, it is really complex, and people are picking away at it, and they're picking away at it in their own little kind of corner of the world. And I think I think that pattern probably does change from kind of location to location. So I think that the birds, when you say they're redistributing almost immediately, is it like season opens on Saturday, and by Sunday they're all on these refuges? Does it take them like 2-3 days to get there?
That's kind of tough to answer, because season usually opens on a Saturday, and we might not fly the survey until Tuesday or Wednesday of the next week, depending on the weather, right? So it's tough to say. I would say at least partially, probably, right? I don't know how long it takes these birds to figure out. There was some really cool research done in the 90s by Josh Dooley over in Colorado on the Platte, where he looked at like immediate responses of mallards to hunting disturbance. And that's kind of a really cool project that a lot of these disturbance projects are building off of. But I think you could look at that, and Joe Lancaster stuff out of Mississippi to look at how immediate those responses are.
Yeah, where I'm kind of headed with this is, and I've spoke to this about Doug Osborne stuff in Arkansas, is that the comment was, well, all the birds we tagged early in the season just all went to refuges and they got in these patterns where they really weren't available to hunters. Well, people are still shooting ducks. So I think this really speaks to like why the Foul Weather podcast works and that duck migration forecast works, because the ducks you're shooting, once they figure you out, tend not to be your local birds unless there's some kind of weather event or some shift in disturbance or something that pushes them to change. The birds you tend to be shooting are the naive ones that have just shown up that don't know where guns are yet. And so, like last year you talked about, and I want to get into this, will roll right into your duck season last year, is I'm thinking that, when that migration stalled, you must have just had a pile of stale ducks. So like what did your duck season look like? Were there good opportunities? Did it pick up for a little bit and then just shut off, or what was it like for you?
It was feast or famine,
Yeah.
more so than any other year that certainly since I've been here. And I know I've only been hunting in central Illinois for 10 years, but it was really feast or famine. So some places were just on fire and had better years than they've had in a really long time. But other years just suffered, and there didn't seem to be any in between. There didn't seem to be places where the hunting was just kind of okay. It was good, but not great. Either it was really, really good or really, really bad. And I don't know the reasons for that. Maybe it's those refuges loaded up early, and that was just the source of that, source of that particular hunting area. But and the other places didn't have, birds to move around. I don't know. That's just terrible speculation on my part.
Yeah, no, it's always hard to figure these things out. But like, did you bounce around to different public places yourself, or I think you've got like a permanent blind that you share with folks, if I recall,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah.
How much did you hunt? You're like, was that a private lease you have, and then
it is. So
okay.
I hunt a lot on a private lease, but I try to bounce around on public land as much as I can. I'm not incredibly. My luck is pretty poor when it comes to drawing, and if you don't draw in Illinois, you're kind of out in the cold, unfortunately. And so I went. I had a few good hunts on public ground, but nothing really to write home about. And our the ground the club that I'm in, we really didn't have. It may have been our worst year, actually.
Really? Yeah.
Since the club started in 2012.
And how often do you guys try to hunt that place, like among all of you involved in that lease?
That place gets hunted every day.
Every day.
Somebody's out there every day. And it's just like any other place. We're dependent upon water level and food, and some years we have it, some years we don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's do you have control over the management of that at all then, I hope?
We do not. No, we do not.
That's rough. That's tough. Huh?
Yeah. It's
especially when you know how to manage something, right? It makes it really painful to look at sometimes.
Not the ideal setup, but we're pretty lucky to have it. It's nice to have a spot. I'm finding as I get older and got kids, it's nice to have a spot,
for sure,
that I can just go and not have to worry about it.
Yeah, I'm mostly at the mercy of public land around here. I mean, we've got a lot of just public water that we can legally hunt throughout, around the home office here, but it doesn't always tend to be that spectacular for birds because there's just not food like there are on the refuges and in state wildlife management areas. But
yeah.
So back to a little bit of flying stuff too, since we're kind of talking about public lands versus clubs. You fly over both. Are there like major differences in the numbers of hunters or ducks you see from the bird's eye view in the plane?
No, not really. I mean, you can definitely tell when the hunting's good. I guess, and tough to gauge because some of the public areas you have to be out by noon or 1 o'clock, and others you can hunt all day. It just depends on the place. But yeah, I don't know that there's any big difference.
So do you see massive amounts of, this is like tongue in cheek, and maybe they're out there, but like ice eaters and lots of flooded corn on clubs around up and down the Illinois and in the sections of the
Oh
Mississippi
yeah,
River you fly?
yeah, we got heaters too. You can see the heaters from the plane. There's a big iridescent orange glow underneath all the water that's
You just
keeping
set
everything
off
open
every
down
single person to the south of you. You know that, right?
there. I
So.
know, I know. No, it's in years like last year, it doesn't matter because nothing's frozen anyway.
Right, right.
So it certainly there's been more places that have started planting corn more, but there are also places that are starting to manage a little bit more for moist soil management here. That was a big push by the wetland wildlife program here in the Illinois DNR, was to try to promote. In fact, we've done a bunch of workshops over the past few years, kind of informing staff about moist soil management and the benefits of it. And so I don't know that there's been a huge, increase in flooded corn. Even even hearing private club managers just singing the praises of moist soil management these days. And so I don't know that there's a huge difference in the amount of flooded corn, at least in the area that we fly.
Yeah,
And the eye feeder thing, I mean, it just kind of it is what it is. And anymore in central Illinois, if you look on a Facebook Marketplace, you're going to see ice eaters because people are selling them because they don't have to use them.
it doesn't
Like
even matter anymore, right?
yeah, we don't
Yeah.
freeze right here,
Yeah.
at least in the past few years. I mean, I know that's subject to change and will change as we move into the future, but I there are bigger problems, I think.
I think so. I think so too. And this is what I always say to folks is like, yeah, there's some ice eaters out there and there's some flooded corn out there. But I mean, in those traditional winters when we used to have, I don't know, a foot of snow and we'd be ice fishing by, mid January, that doesn't happen anymore. We didn't ice fish this year until like the second week of February.
Right.
And I only went one time, right? So if you've got, foot thick ice and 2 foot of snow, it doesn't matter.
Right.
I mean, yes, the ice eaters do a thing, right? But there's not enough of them at that landscape scale to hold birds at that rate, right? So if it gets cold and it snows, those birds are going to push, and that's just not. I mean, the fact that people are selling ice eaters alone at your latitude says, yeah. It's just getting more and more warm, and folks don't even need these dang things anymore.
Yeah.
So
And I think people, certainly ice eaters work to hold water open at certain temperatures. But I think people overestimate the mystical powers of the ice eaters when it gets sub-zero. I mean, those things work, but they don't work when it's just brutally cold out and putting on ice that's thick enough to ice fish on.
Yeah.
Like there's
sure.
only so much you can do. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, those gotta be fun places to fly over and see all that stuff, though. All the different habitats, the moist soil, and I appreciate that y'all are kind of pushing moist soil a little bit more because I'm sold on it. The diversity of birds you feed on it, the length that the seed is there, and just the how much easier it is to just grow weeds than pay to grow corn, and sometimes trying to grow crops on pretty bad ground too, right? Like that's a typical bad mistake by folks. So it's a lot easier to grow weeds, and the bird response is going to be pretty awesome. And it's actually more, nutritionally complete, all that wild seed that's out there anyway. So
yeah, and especially in a system like ours that's really flashy. I mean, you get like a July, August, September flood, and you're toast if you've planted flooded corn, or if you've planted corn. Right. I mean, you're not going to have time, not going to have enough growing season left. You've wasted all of that money.
Yep.
But if if it's a flash kind of a pulse flood and you can draw back down, then you still got plenty of time, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's, and I could sing the praises of moist soil management for a while now. And, you know, certainly hot crops have their place. They're an excellent source of energy,
Yep.
but they're not, you know, the old, the restaurant kind of analogy. Like they're not all serving. They don't meet all of the needs of the waterfowl.
Yeah, I mean, if I was in an area and it was just clubs that were kind of in an arms race for flooded corn around me, I would probably just do moist soil because you're putting that one thing on the landscape that the birds are having a hard time finding, right?
Exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. Hey, so when you're up there, I mean, you've got this. What's the height you guys fly at? How low do you get to the deck?
So 150, 200 feet,
Okay. Yeah.
just you know, depending on what's in the area, um, you know, power
Yeah.
lines, trees, whatever. I mean, we have to get
Yeah.
pretty low so we can tell, so we can determine species and that kind of thing. But um,
Yeah, that was my favorite thing was being like, 150 foot off the deck and the pilot doing figure eights around these rock shoals off the coast of Maine and counting eiders and scoters, right? And just cool, keeping me in a pattern to get a good count of those birds and then moving on. But and that's kind of, I mean, some of my favorite memories is looking like straight down through the side window at these birds to count them. But
yeah,
is there something about surveys that you like your favorite part other than, I mean, I could stare at aerial photos all day long. I remember being in a
yeah,
plane, just loving to see that. I still do that when I go up in a plane, a commercial plane. I always get the window seat and I'm just like a little kid just glued to the window trying to see everything that's out there. But so what is your favorite part, Josh? What is it that you see from flying that is just
so those,
something you can't get away from?
yeah, so those moments, like, you know, like you talked about when you're in a turn and you're looking down and, you know, there's, gosh, you know, 70,000 ducks
Oh,
below you.
yeah.
Like I it's funny, but they're, you know, Mike having the background of a crop duster. If you tell him to stand on it, he's going to stand on it. He's going to turn it. He's going to turn the plane on its side, and you're going to be, you
Hmm.
know, looking straight down. And so those moments are really, really cool. I think for me though, just like looking over the kind of just the totality of the survey is seeing the migration happen in real time. You know, kind of
Mm-hmm.
watching because, you know, growing up down south and you know, hunting in my 20s down there, um, you're just kind of waiting and hoping for pushes
Right.
of birds, you
Right.
know, and being able to see that migration play out in real time and being able to share real results with the stakeholders that we have. So that,
Mm-hmm.
of course, the DNR stakeholders, of course, the Fish and Wildlife Service folks, the Nature Conservancy folks that you know count on our data, but also the public. You know, Aaron started this kind of weekly blog, and it kind of built this following all on its own. And you know, there are bad parts of it, but being able to share real time results with people is pretty valuable, I think. And you kind of have to post and ghost. You know, you can't stay in the comments or you'll get pretty, you know,
You think?
disillusioned.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
for
I think
sure.
it's cool. It's cool to be able to share that experience with people. To like, here's the birds that are in your area, and that doesn't mean you're going to have a great hunt tomorrow. But that
Right.
means these birds were in your area on this day, and you know you can make your decision to hunt on that if you want to. But it's just
Mhm.
a cool piece of information that, you know, a lot of places don't really have.
Yeah, the fact that you make it publicly available too, and relatively quickly, you got to get back to the office and tally everything up. But there are a lot of people very interested in that, and you guys do a fantastic job of pushing that on social media and engaging with the duck hunting public as well. And that's a lot of the stuff that I really enjoy about what y'all do, beyond collaborating with you for
Sure.
really for research with graduate students. But I haven't hit on the one thing everybody wants to know about is like, mallard populations are down, and you guys probably saw less mallards on your surveys too, I'm guessing this year, just probably because that number's down, but maybe also they were just spread out on the landscape. Your general, mallard counts compared to normal, did it feel pretty abysmal, or where were you at?
Yeah, so I spent the better part of November at least, and probably into December, asking Mike where the mallards were.
Yeah.
I, I'd have to. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but it sure felt like they were just spread out over time. That's my best guess is that we got them, but we didn't kind of have this immediate influx of birds at the typical peak period for us for mallards anyway. And I think you could look at how long we held them as kind of an indicator of that. So we held,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I don't remember the number, but I know we were counting a lot of mallards that first week of January on the last flight of the year. And so it's a real problem. And as the research that you're involved with, you and Phil Labretsky, I mean, this is a multifaceted problem. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
there's not one silver bullet for it. It's a lot of different things going on at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, prairies are dry, grass conditions aren't good. Lots of folks have chatted about that, and I would have expected you to see fewer birds for sure.
Hmm.
I really that makes me think real hard about what you just said there. Is like you didn't get one big slug of mallards that all showed up and then left, right? It's almost like you could have had hundreds of thousands of mallards or whatever, but they might have been different ones through that whole time, right? Like each
Right.
time you count, it's a different bird. And that's one thing that we have a hard time detecting, right? Is whether
Hmm.
these numbers that you're seeing are all the same birds for a month, or did some of them move on and then you got new ones, but your number's about the same. So those are two different ways that it can happen. So if mallards were just kind of trickling through, which was kind of my feeling all season. I mean, I had one week that I hunted 4 times, and I did it because I knew the mallards were coming, and we hit 3 flight days out of those 4. And that was it. That was our
Yeah.
flight for the season, and so other than that, there were just trickles of new birds, but mostly stale birds around, and just spread out kind of everywhere. So
Right.
I don't think anybody's denying that we've got less mallards. That's not an arguing point. It's just like, where were they? And I can't get it. The ones that we did have, where were they? And I can't
Hmm.
get anywhere with all of my thought process and all my research over time. Then they were just kind of
Yeah.
they were everywhere, right?
Yeah. I mean,
So.
I was calling around. I was calling folks in North Dakota and calling, I mean, just all over, the Mississippi Flyway, like folks that I knew had decent counts of birds who did refuge counts or,
Hmm.
just hunted a lot and hunted kind of a big area, trying to figure out where all the mallards were. And I think the answer is they were everywhere. They,
Yeah.
they, they
in
were
in
just
small
so
numbers though, like no
right,
concentrations anyplace. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, the B pop will be interesting, to see where we come in there, and we got a little bit more water back in portions of like South Dakota, but Canada's still dry, so
Hmm.
hoping for the best for mallards. But we also got to understand, like, folks have done those Lincoln Peter estimators too, and there's outside of the traditional survey area, there's a ton of mallards in all other types of locations too. So
Right. Right.
they're not they're hitting their bottom here, but they should cycle back up. We hopefully can get some water and grass back on the landscape for them, and,
Yeah.
and give them a chance.
Yeah. Fingers
Anyhow,
crossed.
yeah, fingers crossed. I still like to shoot a pile of greenheads if I can get a hold of them. So so given I mean, you see duck country from above and duck country from the blind. What tidbit of wisdom can you provide duck hunters across duck country to kind of make the experience better? We always kind of want to, towards the end of the podcast, kind of put out some optimism. So if you had one thing to change about duck hunting, or maybe you've got a few, to make it better, what do you think it would be, Josh?
I don't really know. I think all we can do is kind of enjoy the time that we get out and find value in the other things other than killing limits of birds. I mean, there's been some studies that look at changing the limits up over time, and
Mm-hmm.
if our limit was a little bit less, we would get just as excited as at about a lower limit as we do as at killing a lower limit than we do as killing the same number of birds with a higher limit.
Yeah.
Um, I think just if everybody and I'd certainly pointing the finger at myself here. If everybody, if we all just try to spend a little bit more time enjoying the smaller things, getting kids out, taking the camaraderie of it a little bit more to heart, and enjoying the things out during the hunt and outside of the hunt that we don't always notice.
Yeah,
And
the entire culture, right, of duck hunting is what makes it awesome, and that camaraderie. In addition to all the sights and smells of the marsh.
Yeah, and the running joke is, if you're out there taking pictures of sunsets and sending them, that you're not killing any birds, but that doesn't have to be the case. You can still enjoy everything about the experience. I don't know. I think we take ourselves a little bit too seriously sometimes.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, the piles of ducks are great, and do I go for I mean, I'm there to hunt ducks and shoot ducks, right? Like that's ultimately what I'm there for. But I also have to, as you said, not take myself too seriously, and just breathe in all the other stuff that is duck hunting, and that includes. I mean, I love just bringing birds home and sitting, in front of the barn on the plucking table and cleaning birds and having a beer and listening to music with friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that whole process, right, from beginning to end. And when my wife and I get the decoys ready in the dark the night before, if we're going to hunt together, and dogs are running around and putting guns, in cases and making sure we got all the right shells and that stuff, so that we don't show up and then have a domestic in the marsh because somebody didn't pack the shells when you get there. But like all that stuff, it's all of it combined, and the stories afterwards, and hiding stories from people, right, when it gets good too, like trying to get away and BS your way out of a situation, so not everybody knows that some spot at a refuge is super hot, so you can shoot it for 3 days for yourself. But no, I like that. I think the comment of we don't take yourself too seriously, I think is important, and enjoy everything that it has to offer. So thanks, Josh. That's great.
Yep.
So thanks for joining us, bud. I don't expect this is going to be the last we hear from you on the Foul Weather Podcast. I think, a wealth of knowledge from above, and I won't tap you too many times, but maybe in the season next year, I might get a hold of you and say, hey, here's what the weather severity index is saying. Are you seeing the same thing? And, you do have to respond with, yes, I'm seeing exactly the same thing. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. I'm just kidding. It does work. I mean, I follow it quite a bit, and I actually hunt less now to reduce my disturbance, but kill more birds, have more days where there's birds in the sky above me. So it's not perfect, but if you used to have a 50-50 chance and now you got an 80% chance of seeing ducks, I'd go with the 80%. So but yeah, Josh, no, we'll get you back on here. Really appreciate you.
Yeah, you bet. Glad to do it.
And did you pick up on this last portion? Have you been listening at all? I'm having the guests take us out.
Oh yeah, I'll give it a go. Give it a go.
Give her a whirl, Josh.
Thanks, Mike, for having me. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And, as always, may your skies be filled and shoot straight, my friends.
Bingo.